The moment I saw the head table, I knew I had been erased. 3 chairs, not 4. 3 perfect seats gleaming beneath the chandeliers, ready for my parents and my sister, the bride. And then the blank space where mine should have been a deliberate absence, as sharp as a knife to the chest. Around me, the ballroom pulsed with light and laughter. Guests in silk gowns twirled. Waiters glided with trays of champagne. The quartet played with delicate precision. To everyone else, this was perfection, the most beautiful wedding Vancouver had seen in years. To me, it was a crime scene. My crime being born the wrong daughter. I had built this day brick by brick, detail by detail, sleepless night after sleepless night. The rose arrangements standing proud in golden vases, the shimmering linen across the tables, the subtle fragrance of eucalyptus drifting in the air, the music swelling just enough to feel cinematic but not overwhelming. It was all mine. I had carved my name invisibly into every inch of this celebration, though it would never be spoken aloud. And yet, despite the weight of my effort, I was not worthy of a seat. The humiliation was exquisite in its cruelty. This wasn't oversight. It was intentional. I remembered, with a cold clarity, the sound of my mother's voice only 3 days earlier, overheard while she stood at the edge of the ballroom. Prepare 3 seats only. Eliza doesn't count as family. The words struck me harder than any blow. I had carried them like poison in my veins ever since, pretending composure, finishing my duties, making sure the event would dazzle, but seeing the truth made physical in those 3 chairs. I could no longer deny it. My chest constricted, but my face remained composed. The mask of the professional I had always been. The clipboard in my hand felt heavier than stone, as though it carried not paper but every year of silence I had swallowed. They had pushed me into the shadows my entire life, but this chair, this empty chair, was different. This was no longer invisibility. This was erasure. And for the first time in 32 years, I decided I would not endure. I would answer. But to understand how I arrived at this precipice, you would have to know my childhood. I was born in the damp gray heart of Vancouver, the city where glass towers rose from mist and rain fell like a permanent veil. Mara, my sister, had come 2 years earlier, wrapped in pink silk and adoration. To my parents, she was perfection incarnate, the child whose existence justified theirs. I was the afterthought, the addition, the quieter echo that followed too soon. From the beginning, the divide was sharp. Mara's life glowed with privileged ballet recitals where she floated across stages in silk tutus, art camps by the sea, piano lessons with renowned instructors. My own path was paved with practicality secondhand sneakers, afternoons in the public library, quiet hours fixing broken chair legs in the basement while father nodded at my steady hands. Birthdays drew the line even clearer. At 10, Mara was gifted a horse a-living, breathing symbol of wealth and favoritism. I remember the applause of relatives as she trotted in circles, the sheen of her hair catching the late summer sun. On my 10th birthday, I was handed a department store gift card. So you can choose something yourself, Mother said, as though freedom of choice were compensation for absence of care. I chose notebooks and pens. That year, I began to write, carving truths into pages that would never be spoken aloud. School offered no refuge. Teachers adored Mara, pinning her essays to bulletin boards, praising her paintings. I was the helper, the one who stayed behind to clean brushes and stack chairs. Dependable, invisible. Recognition belonged to her. Responsibility belonged to me. By high school, the gap had widened into a chasm. Mara's trust fund paid for tutors, European art tours, gallery internships. I worked shifts at a diner, the smell of grease clinging to my uniform, saving coins for field trips while she posed under the Eiffel Tower. The year university letters arrived. Mara's came with a fully furnished apartment funded by our parents. Mine came with loan applications. Father patted my shoulder and said, "You'll manage. You're the responsible one." I signed away years of my future in student loans, my hand trembling, my voice silent. It was at 19 that I learned the truth of the trust fund. Grandfather had left over $300,000 to be shared equally between his granddaughters. I heard it by accident. A fragment of conversation between mother and her lawyer Mara has expenses. Eliza is fine on her own. The words fell into me like stones into deep water, sinking without end. The trust fund dwindled over the years. Each withdrawal marked educational expenses, but coinciding neatly with Mara's vacations, ski trips in Whistler, art residencies in Tuscany, shopping sprees in New York. By the time I was 30, the account that should have lifted me was nearly empty, drained to fuel her luxuries. My name remained on the paper, but only as a ghost. Through it all, I built myself. I turned my eye for detail into a career, founding Harper & Cody events. I learned to design spaces that sparkled, to coordinate moments that lingered in memory. Clients praised me, vendors trusted me, colleagues respected me. In the professional world, I became what I had never been at home: indispensable. So when Mara announced her wedding, my mother's declaration was swift and cold. Of course, Eliza will plan it. Not a request, but an assignment. I did not protest. I poured myself into the work, sculpting the wedding into perfection. Night bled into dawn as I designed lighting diagrams, stitched linens, negotiated with florists. I sacrificed sleep, health, and peace to create a day that would shine like a diamond in Vancouver's social calendar. And then the day arrived. Back in that glittering hall, staring at 3 chairs, my memories collided with my present. Every sacrifice, every unspoken wound, every betrayal crystallized into a single truth: I had been erased. But erasure, I realized, is not silence. Erasure is provocation. The guests laughed. Oblivious, the quartet played, strings vibrating in harmony. The chandeliers gleamed. My sister would soon glide in, radiant in her gown, the star of a show I had directed. My parents would smile for cameras, basking in reflected glory. And me, I was to stand in the shadows, clipboard in hand, the invisible architect. Except for that missing chair. The empty chair screamed louder than any music, more piercing than any toast. It was not just the absence of a seat. It was the absence of recognition, of belonging, of love. I clenched the clipboard tighter, breath steady, posture perfect. For 32 years, I had been their shadow. But tonight, the shadow was learning to burn. This wedding would not end the way they planned. The empty chair had branded itself into my mind like fire against skin. I stood in that ballroom, all glitter and perfection, knowing that everything I had built was a stage for my own erasure. Yet beneath the humiliation, another sensation began to rise: a slow, relentless current of power. For once, the mask of dutiful daughter had cracked. I would not be silent, not anymore. I slipped quietly toward the service entrance, heels clicking like gunshots on the marble floor. My clipboard clutched tight against my chest. The air in the hallway was cooler, tinged with the smell of roasted salmon drifting from the kitchen, away from the crowd. My composure broke for a moment. My hands trembled, and my breath came ragged. Anger surged through me, hot and electric, filling every hollow place left by years of neglect. I pressed my back against the wall, eyes closed. Memories tore through me: the gift card birthdays, the ignored accomplishments, the endless comparisons to Mara. But none stung like the trust fund. That money had been my grandfather's promise, his attempt to make sure I would be cared for even when my parents turned their backs. And they had stolen it, piece by piece, trip by trip, indulgence by indulgence. I opened my laptop, balancing it against my knees on a narrow service bench. The screen's glow painted my face in pale blue. My files opened like wounds folders labeled invoices, bank statements, trust fund. For years, I had tracked everything, not because I intended to use it, but because some part of me knew the truth would surface one day. Now, staring at the numbers, I felt the cold precision of betrayal. The family home in West Vancouver, valued at over $2 million, carried not one but two mortgages. The second, taken just months ago, nearly equaled the first. Credit card statements lay thick with overdue balances, interest spiraling out of control. But it was the trust fund that broke me again once $300,000. Now a pitiful balance, barely enough to pay for flowers on the tables I had set. Each withdrawal was marked M. Harper Education, but matched perfectly with Mara's social media glow: Paris in spring, Aspen in winter, the Greek islands in summer. Education, indeed. I scrolled further, my chest tightening. The vendors for this very wedding: caterers, florists, musicians, lighting technicians, all listed as unpaid. Some had sent warning emails in the past week, threatening cancellation. I had covered deposits from my own account, thousands of dollars gone in silence, hoping she would pay later. But now, here it was nothing but red. Mara had built her perfect wedding on sand, and I had been the one shoveling the grains to hold it together. My phone buzzed on this bench beside me. Messages poured in: final payment not received. Please advise, lighting services will be suspended unless cleared by 3 p.m. Florist requires confirmation by 4 p.m. Balance overdue. I pressed the device face down, shutting out the noise. I could no longer be their safety net. I remembered 3 nights ago, when I had returned to the venue after midnight to approve lighting adjustments. Through the cracked door of the bridal suite, I had overheard my mother's voice, cold, clipped, filled with certainty. Prepare 3 chairs. Eliza doesn't count as family. She's just the help. The words had cut deeper than any insult I had endured before. Just the help. And yet, without me, the very roof over their heads tonight would collapse. That truth was suddenly intoxicating. For the first time in my life, I held the power. At 2:45 p.m., I drafted the letter. To all vendors and partners of Harper & Co. Events. This notice serves as formal withdrawal of Harper & Co.'s guarantee for the Lopez-Harper wedding, effective immediately due to non-payment. All further services rendered are to be considered direct agreements between vendor and client. I signed my name with calm precision, my company logo glowing at the top. My hand did not tremble. I scheduled the message to send at 3:15 p.m., 15 minutes before Mara was due to walk down the aisle. For years, I had been their insurance, their invisible guarantee. Now, I was removing the net. I leaned back, breath sharp in my throat. The room felt lighter, as though invisible chains had begun to loosen. I closed my laptop and rose, smoothing the navy silk of my dress. When I returned to the ballroom, the scene glittered with a cruel perfection. Guests laughed, oblivious to the storm brewing just outside their vision. Mara stood near the entrance in her ivory gown, glowing, flawless, as cameras flashed like lightning. My mother hovered at her side, champagne in hand, basking in borrowed glory. My father shook hands with relatives, wearing the calm smile of a man who still believed his empire intact. They had no idea their empire was about to crumble. The music swelled, the procession began. Mara glided down the aisle as though floating, every eye trained on her. I stood near the back, spine rigid, heart pounding like a drum. The clock ticked toward 3:15. And then it happened. My phone vibrated once, then again, then continuously. Vendors confirmed receipt. One by one, services began to fall apart. The quartet faltered, then stopped mid-song. Confusion etched across their faces. The lighting dimmed, leaving shadows crawling up the walls. Waiters whispered among themselves. Trays suddenly abandoned. At the head table, my mother's smile faltered. My father's brow furrowed. Mara, radiant only moments before, turned toward them in panic. The perfection they had stolen from me was unraveling thread by thread. But I wasn't finished. I would not simply let their empire collapse. I would reveal the truth. Every hidden betrayal, every stolen cent. I had the documents, the proof, the ledger of lies that built this wedding on foundations of theft. And before this night ended, everyone would know. The empty chair had been their declaration. Now, it would become mine. The unraveling began like a whisper, but it grew into a roar. At first, only a few guests noticed the silence of the quartet, their bows frozen mid-air. A murmur spread when the chandeliers dimmed, plunging corners of the ballroom into uneasy shadow. Waiters abandoned half-filled champagne flutes, their eyes flicking nervously toward the head table. Perfection cracked like porcelain under too much weight. My mother rose from her seat, fury flashing in her eyes. My father leaned forward, speaking in urgent whispers to the hotel manager, who shook his head and gestured toward me. Mara's face, moments ago radiant, drained of color as the whispers around her grew sharper. I felt the weight of every gaze turning, shifting, narrowing onto me. For years I had been invisible. Now I was the axis of the room. The hotel manager straightened his tie, his voice carrying across the crowd with measured authority. Ladies and gentlemen, we regret to inform you that several services have been suspended due to non-payment. Gasps rippled like a wave crashing on shore. Heads turned, conversations broke into fragments of disbelief. Non-payment. The Lopez Harper family. The words slithered through the crowd, sharp and cutting. I stepped forward, my clipboard no longer a symbol of servitude, but of command. My heels struck the marble with deliberate rhythm. I approached the head table, and the sea of guests parted instinctively, eyes wide, breaths held. My mother's voice hissed low, meant to intimidate, but fear made her tremble. "What have you done?" I did not answer her. Instead, I turned to the crowd. "You see 3 chairs here," I said, my voice steady, carrying across the cavernous room. 3 chairs for my parents and my sister, but not for me. That missing chair was not an oversight. It was a message. It told me that I do not count as family. The silence was heavy, suffocating. I pulled a folder from my clipboard, unfolding documents with sharp precision. For years, I planned every event this family flaunted. I covered their mistakes. I paid their bills. I worked myself to exhaustion. Tonight is no different except tonight. I am no longer their shield. I held up the first sheet bank statements, lines of red ink glaring beneath the ballroom lights. This home you boast of in West Vancouver mortgaged twice, drowning in debt. The credit cards months overdue, balances compounding. The wedding you sit in now unpaid. Every vendor, florists, musicians, caterers ignored. Gasps spread faster, sharper. Whispers cut through like blades. I unfolded another page, and the trust fund left by our grandfather, meant for both daughters, over $300,000 emptied, withdrawals masked as education expenses for Mara. But tell me, do ski trips in Aspen, summers in Tuscany, and Parisian shopping sprees sound like education to you? A ripple of outrage coursed through the room. Mara's new husband froze, his eyes darting between her pale face and the damning pages in her hands. Guests leaned forward, eager, horrified, enthralled. Mara's composure crumbled. Her mascara ran in black rivulets as she stammered, but no words came. My father reached out a trembling hand as though he could snatch the documents from me, but I stepped back, raising them higher. "For 32 years," I said, voice breaking but strong, "I have been invisible, the responsible one, the one told to manage alone. Tonight, you have made it clear I am not your daughter, not your family, but I am something greater. I am the one who will no longer carry your lies." The silence was absolute, broken only by the frantic tapping of the photographer's camera capturing every second. My mother's face was carved from stone, her fury collapsing into naked fear. My father looked small, his once commanding posture bent under the weight of exposure. Mara collapsed into her chair, veil slipping, her perfect day dissolving into scandal. And then the dam burst. Vendors stormed the ballroom, voices raised, demanding payment. The florist shouted about unpaid balances. The caterer declared service suspended. The lighting technician unplugged cords mid-sentence. Guests recoiled, clutching purses and champagne flutes, murmuring about fraud and disgrace. Reporters, always circling the edges of high society weddings, snapped photos and scribbled furiously. I stood at the center, unmoving, the calm within the storm. The empty chair glared beside my family like a ghost, the perfect symbol of all that had been denied me. The world now saw the truth. I left the ballroom before the collapse reached its peak. The sound followed me, raised voices, angry vendors, stunned guests, Mara's sobs, my mother's desperate pleas. But I did not turn back. I stepped into the cool Vancouver night, the air damp with rain, the city lights reflecting in slick pavement. For the first time in my life, I was not burdened by their shadow. My phone buzzed relentlessly, calls from vendors, texts from acquaintances, voicemails from family. I silenced it. The only sound I wanted was the steady rhythm of my heels against the wet sidewalk, carrying me away from the wreckage I had ignited. That night, in my apartment overlooking Falls Creek, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. Emails flooded in confirmation of service suspensions, news alerts already buzzing with the scandal, messages from vendors thanking me for honesty, not deception. My bank account groaned with the charges I had covered. But for once, I did not feel bitterness. I felt freedom. I wrote in my journal one line: the empty chair was not rejection, it was direction. Yet freedom came with consequence. The next morning, headlines blazed across Vancouver society: wedding collapses, amid financial scandal. My parents' faces splashed across screens, Mara's tear-streaked veil immortalized in print. The trust fund theft surfaced in public record, sparking whispers of lawsuits. By the end of the week, the family home was in foreclosure proceedings. Mara's husband had vanished, lawyers in tow. My parents, once titans of reputation, hid in shame, their phone calls unanswered, their invitations rescinded. And me. For the first time, I stood in the light not as their daughter, not as their shadow, but as myself. The collapse of their perfect day had been my liberation, but it was only the beginning. The wedding had collapsed like a sandcastle against the tide, and by dawn, the scandal had already spread beyond Vancouver. Headlines blazed across the internet, tabloids devoured the story, and whispers spread like wildfire in the circles my parents once commanded. Their empire of image, so carefully polished, so ruthlessly maintained, was ash. I sat in my apartment overlooking the harbor, the morning fog rolling in over the water. My phone buzzed endlessly, messages from journalists seeking comment, vendors confirming canceled contracts, and family numbers I had already blocked. I poured black coffee into a chipped mug, sat cross-legged by the window, and let the silence fill me. For the first time, silence felt like victory. By the end of the week, the cascade of consequences was undeniable. The bank seized the family's West Vancouver mansion, the house that once gleamed with marble floors and glass chandeliers. Luxury cars vanished from the driveway, repossessed. Invitations to galas and fundraisers no longer bore my parents' names. Mara's new husband, after only days of marriage, filed for annulment, citing financial deception. The gossip columns feasted, painting her not as the radiant bride she had dreamed of being, but as a cautionary tale of greed. I watched all of it unfold with a detachment that surprised me. For so many years, I had longed for them to acknowledge the injustice, to see me, to value me, Now that their world had crumbled, I no longer needed their recognition. The truth was enough. 3 weeks later, they came. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when I found them waiting in the cafe across from my office. My parents looked smaller, shrunken into themselves. Father's tailored suits had been replaced by off-the-rack jackets that hung loosely on his frame. Mother's hair, once meticulously highlighted, showed streaks of gray, her makeup failing to mask exhaustion. Mara sat between them, eyes hollow, her hands bare where a wedding ring had been. They looked up as I entered, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel the urge to shrink. I stood tall, umbrella dripping rainwater onto the floor, and approached their table. There were 3 chairs waiting for me, evenly spaced across from theirs. I sat, the irony sharp as glass. Father cleared his throat first. His voice no longer carried authority but trembled with need. We made mistakes. We need your help. The bank has given us 30 days to vacate. We thought, perhaps you might... His words trailed off, shame heavy in the air. Mother's eyes searched mine, watery and desperate. We favored Mara because she was easier. You were always so independent, Eliza. We thought you didn't need us, but we were wrong. Mara leaned forward, her voice cracked and raw. They told me you never expected anything, that you didn't care about the trust fund, that you didn't want it. Tears welled in her eyes. I believed them. I see now what they took from you. For a long moment, I let the silence stretch. Rain tapped against the window, the sound steady and relentless. My hands lay calmly on the table, palms open, no longer clenched into fists. I remembered every birthday where Mara had gifts wrapped in silk while I unwrapped gift cards. Every university payment I signed alone while she was handed apartments. Every dismissal, every you'll manage, every time I was reduced to shadow. And I remembered the empty chair. The debt between us, I said slowly, my voice firm but steady, is not measured in dollars. It is measured in years, in silence, in erasure, and that debt cannot be repaid. Their faces crumpled shock, disbelief, desperation. Father opened his mouth, but I raised a hand, stopping him. I will not fund your recovery. I will not bail you out. The life you built was never mine to save. Mara reached across the table, her fingers trembling. Please, Eliza, you can't just abandon us. I looked at her hand but did not take it. You abandoned me first. That chair you left empty, it set me free. I don't need a place at your table anymore. I am building my own. I stood, the legs of my chair scraping against the cafe floor. Their eyes followed me, wide with disbelief. My mother whispered my name as though it might anchor me, but I walked away, steps measured, deliberate. Some debts are never repaid. Some chairs remain empty by choice. Months passed. I poured myself into my work, into building Harper & Co., into a force beyond Vancouver. Weddings, galas, corporate events. The name Harper became synonymous with elegance and integrity. Clients sought me not only for my precision, but for the quiet strength they sensed beneath it. The story of the scandal followed me, but instead of harming, it elevated. I had stood for truth, and in a city of masks, that mattered. A year later, I stood on the terrace of a Tuscan villa, overseeing the wedding of an international artist. The sunset bathed the courtyard in gold. The music floated soft and steady, and everything unfolded with perfection. My assistant approached, tablet in hand. Your mother called the office again, she said gently. I smiled, gazing at the horizon, the same answer as always. Later that night, in my rented apartment overlooking the Arno River, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my journal. On the first page, I had written a single line months ago. The empty chair was not rejection, it was direction. Now, I added another sometimes. The seat we lose is the freedom we gain. Back in Vancouver, word reached me that my parents lived in a modest rental, my mother working part-time at a department store, my father tutoring students to make ends meet. Mara rented a small studio apartment, her social media empty of lavish trips, her name fading from society pages. It was the life they once looked down upon, the life they condemned others for living. Now it was theirs. The universe had balanced its scales. On the anniversary of Mara's ruined wedding, I hosted a charity gala of my own. The theme was resilience. At the center of the ballroom stood a single installation, a chair, draped in white silk, lit by a single spotlight. Guests asked about it, curious. I explained simply, it represents what I overcame, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful seat at the table is the one you walk away from. The crowd applauded, not in pity, but in recognition. As the night wound down, I stepped onto the terrace, the cool Vancouver air brushing my skin. The city lights shimmered on the water, and for the first time I felt entirely whole. I had been the forgotten daughter, the invisible one, the shadow, but no longer. I had chosen myself, and in doing so, I had won. The empty chair had once been my curse. Now it was my crown.